Welcome to Behind the Smiles podcast, where we go beyond the surface while talking to labs and DSOs about everything your highlight reel doesn't show. If you're into stories, strategy, and a little bit of startup chaos, this one is for you. Hello, welcome everyone to another new episode of Behind the Smiles podcast. So today we have with us a very special guest who is a well-known figure in the dental lab industry, Hugo. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, Hugo, you're the founder and CEO of MediMatch Dental, which is a group of labs. Why don't you introduce yourself? I know everyone should know Hugo and MediMatch, at least in the UK dental industry. But for the people who don't know you or who are just learning about dentistry, can you please give a brief intro about yourself and about your company as well?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, thank you. Well, my name is Hugo. I started MediMatch some 20 years ago. So literally with no cases and no clients, just chasing work and going from there. We are now across 4 countries, and the UK is our main target market, is our biggest market. But yeah, judging my color of my hair, I've been around for a little while.
Great. And Hugo, you said you started 20 years ago. So did you start the first lab started in London or?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, actually, my very first lab was in the Netherlands, but it wasn't working very well. The dynamics are quite different. The system are very different there. And I happened to be managing some practices at the same time in the UK. This was 2006, so it is our 20th year this year. And while I was managing those practices, I realized that there was a real opportunity for the lab business in the UK, and I rented a space in London and started a lab there. And that was effectively my second lab, but I consider it my first lab because the first one wasn't all that good.
Yeah. So I think you've seen 2 decades of running as an owner, as an operator, and now multiple locations and multiple labs as well. Like, how is it running from a founder's perspective? In terms of the lab side, how is it running a lab in UK? There are always challenges, but if you just speak from that as a warm up to this podcast, and also I think what has changed when you started 20 years ago to where we are right now in 2026.
I mean, it's fantastic, right? It's been a sort of a standstill for quite some time where there wasn't all that much digital as yet, even though I remember it's probably more than 12 years ago that I sold my first scanner to a clinic. But it was quite slow at that time, and change didn't happen as quick, and it seems to have accelerated it, particularly due to COVID. I think a lot of things have changed. The digital has really taken off. There's been a lot of investment in the lab side of things, which used to be quite manual and traditional, to really being, well invested and very technical now. So in that way, it's improved in many ways from my point of view.
And do you think that it has become easier now to own and operate a lab for a lab owner? Like, most of our audience would be lab owners or operators or dental group owners. But I think no one understands the real side of labs. And no one, like, if you think of a lot of events and a lot of people, there's a lot of voices on the clinic side, on the dental group side. But I think no one understands the pain of, or at least the hardships of owning and operating the lab side of things. And again, through this, I just want to open that conversation, and we'll go into operational and technical stuffs as well. But just, how is it operating a dental lab?
I don't think it's become easier. I think in general term, running a business, any business, is hard work. If you run a fruit shop or a bakery or a dental lab, owners work very hard. They work very long days. We are in a service industry, so we very much must provide for our clients and make sure they're happy. What I do feel we're a little bit more fortunate now than 10 years ago is that we're less end of chain. I used to feel that labs were almost a little bit of a disposable, whereas now we are more part of the dental team. And in general, it does mean that it's a little bit of an easier place in that sense, because our position is slightly stronger. However, it's still very hard work. It's not easy to make it work. I think a huge problem for lots of labs is, of course, access to technicians. So I don't think in any country there are enough technicians graduating, and then training them to become good technicians is difficult. I'm not sure on the numbers, but I think there's something like 40 graduates a year in the UK, and of those, probably a large number of them never enter into dentistry itself. So the challenge for that is enormous on the owners.
And that, obviously, I'm assuming that that compares with the increasing seats for dentists. So there are more dentists year over year graduating or migrating to work in UK. If you talk from UK perspective,
Yeah.
and patients are more aware of the treatments that they can go after, cosmetic or non-cosmetic. So there's more demand, but then on the supply side, there are not many people to fulfill that demand. Is that
No,
correct?
that's
Fair
right.
understanding of the
Yeah, no,
situation there?
absolutely. I
Yeah.
think I think what's a real big difference is that dentists have always been visible, and as a result, also there's been a lot of investment from companies, material companies and so on, into dentists. They were always the target. So there was more money for that side of dentistry. And the lab side was almost a little bit forgotten. Even today, in this rhetoric of access to dentistry, you hear a lot of talk about dentists and no access to dentists. However, you don't hear much about labs and access to labs. And we are very much part of the team. And I think this is a very important point to make. We're not an isolated part of dentistry. Dentists cannot work without us, and we can't work without dentists. So we are part of the team. And as such, I think more investment is necessary, and more support for technicians is necessary.
Yeah. And I think my wife is a dentist as well. And she always talks about the value that the labs bring. And I think a lot of times, not with her, but in general, you always talk about lab side when things go wrong, that oh,
Mm.
he or she or the lab technician didn't do well. And that's why I'm frustrated, or my patient is not happy. But when everything is smooth, the acknowledgement doesn't go back in the same way. And I think that's, you touched on the really important point that, are they considered part of the same team or not? And same with, the support staff, such as the dental nurses, the practice managers, or the reception staff who are, calling the patients in to book their appointments. I think there's a lot of kind of focus given on to dentists in this whole supply chain versus labs. And I think, do you see that changing, Hugo, or has, like, in the 20 years of, kind of timeline that you have seen? I think you mentioned that, but do you want to touch on that? Has that respect
Yeah,
and acknowledgement come
well,
along?
it hugely changed, and I think it's changed for the better for lab owners. I'm pleased to say that the lack of technicians means that we can be a bit more picky and a bit more strict on how we get instructions. I personally always feel that labs can make anything, and they generally make beautiful work. The important part is that we get the right instruction for that work. And a great example is if you make a beautiful crown and your patient wants an A1 and you made it in 3 because the writing or the instruction were not clear, you end up with a wonderful product that's absolutely useless. So we are part of the team, and we are more and more valued, I think, than some years ago because of less access. A nice thing about that as well is that labs have become more valuable in enterprise value in general. And this as well sits with investments. There is a bit more investment flowing in, but the position of technicians in general has improved, even though it's still hard work.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think thanks for sharing that, because I think people don't realize that, what value the lab technicians and the lab in general they bring to the full fold, and that helps the dentist sell better quality services to their patients and the clinic as a whole as well. So if you shift gears, Hugo, I've seen you're a lot vocal about digital dentistry. Your company is very vocal about, the role
Hmm.
digital dentistry should play or is playing, and underlying the workflows being the enabler of either the lab or the clinical side of businesses. So I think, if you want to talk about that, and I know that digital dentistry is a bit misused word at times as well, but from your side, because I think I've seen your podcasts and other interviews as well. So if you want to define what is digital dentistry from the lab perspective, and
Mm.
what are the different, let's say, pillars that makes digital dentistry, and my assumption is that any lab is not fully digitally connected, but if you want to take a stab at that, and maybe from your perspective, how do you define digital for dentistry?
Yeah, I mean, it's great for us because the feedback loop has been very short. So, where in the traditional flow, somebody takes an impression, inspects the impression, sends it to the lab, and then a model is casted. Someone inspects the cast and then gives feedback. Now the dentist can actually immediately see the model on screen, the end result of that cast. And so the feedback loop is quick. There's no transport on that side of things towards the lab. So it's improved our communication between us and the clinic and us being part of that team. What I think, digital dentistry is very wide because you could scan a model and then become digital from that point. You could scan the patient and become digital from that part. So there's all sorts of steps that you could digitize in the process. In my mind, when I think about a workflow, I divide it in steps. So you've got the first step is triage, which happens in the clinic. Most of the time, it actually happens before the patient even comes in, but when they have contact with the clinic. And then you have some kind of data gathering. Ideally, you can at any step start your digital journey, but you could do your triage, for example, digital by sending a text message to the patient. You can do your data capturing, which is the second step in my digital workflow. You could consider doing that digital with a intraoral scanner, but also with your iPhone or a CBCT scanner. Then you've got design or planning. So you need to either in surgery or in the lab or in an intermediate design whatever you're going to do, the treatment plan or a mock-up or something like that. And then you've got production and finish. And obviously labs are heavy on production and finish. And then the last step is your transport back. And this is also not to be ignored because sometimes we send to the patient, sometimes we send to the dentist. There's all sorts of variations on what you want to do depending on the treatment. Any of these steps you could digitize, but the true digital workflow would be digital from the first step up to the very last step.
Great, great. No, I think thanks for explaining that, because I think what you're saying is that there's a part share that the clinic has to do on the source of capturing the data,
Yep.
and then on the fulfillment side from the lab side, and that should close the loop.
It doesn't necessarily fully close the loop because you get these very interesting hybrid versions. So, for example, your patient is scanned in the clinic. So let's take an extreme case. Maybe the patient took some pictures with their phone. Then they go to the clinic or a scan center. They're being scanned. Then the design, for example, could have been done by a lab or a specialist service. Then it's pinged back to the clinic. The clinic might have finished it on a local mill or local printer. Then you could wonder if the clinic fully finishes it and fits it, or then sends it back to the lab to then do an additional step of some sort. You could, for example, think about a denture. So a denture could have a try-in step in surgery, a finish step in the lab. So you get all these hybrid versions. And if you take a really high level view on this, there's a lot of opportunities that open depending on the investment in equipment and services.
Brilliant. And I think, what do you think, Hugo, is missing from the lab side? Like, what they can do to plug that connectedness for the workflow when it comes to the digital side of things? And the reason I'm asking you this question is that I was on a call with Egilio, and we were doing a podcast just before this. I asked him the same question: what's missing from the clinic side? Because they provide software to clinics and dental groups. And one of the missing pieces is that they don't have a clue of the amount of things that happen on the lab side, which is where we started the discussion from, in terms of where is lab seen in the whole jigsaw puzzle of dentistry. And he asked me to ask the question, that's why I'm asking this question, is that what role can labs play, fix that piece of connectedness in the workflow of digital? And just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
It's a difficult one. I think labs can be a little bit more strict on what data they receive and how they receive their data. The more context or protocol driven labs can be, the better the outcome of the product becomes. So labs are not very efficient if they get all their information in 10 different ways, and if some of the information is missing. A protocol drive, I think, ultimately helps both sides, both the clinic and the lab, and it's that connection between the two that makes it much better for all. The trouble is that because we're in the service industry, there's often not the full desire to force protocols onto the surgeries. But if labs could be quite strict on this, the outcome of the product would be better. But there's no control necessarily on the lab side to do this. A good example is the shade taking of a case. Like I said earlier, you can make a beautiful product but the wrong shade. Now, if we get the right shade, but for example, not the correct pictures, it might be deceiving. And again, you end up with the wrong result. Whereas if you have a strict protocol between yourself and the surgery on how you provide this information, you end up with a better product to everybody's satisfaction. So yeah, this glue, this communication between both sides is always the most important part, I think.
And Hugo, when you mentioned that labs can try to enforce that protocol, but is that like how much leverage do they have? Because again, the service nature of the industry, and is that something that you have seen between successful labs versus not so successful labs? Is that the successful labs implement strict protocols, or maybe I'm just not touching that point from this angle?
Yeah, I mean, we are a service industry, so we must make sure that our clients are happy. But I think you have the biggest benefit if your client as well understands that the protocol is there to help them, and that it delivers better results because of that. So I can give you another example, which is a verification jig in a large case. If you have a large implant case and your dentist accepts a verification jig, yes, it's an additional step, but the end result is a passive fit. A photogrammetry is an even better example. If your client accepts that, and it's difficult to make them accept because it's got cost and all sorts of implications. But if you do that, you end up with a better product. And so I would almost dare say that if you do large structures, you should say, look, I want you to use photogrammetry, not because I want you to use it or because I want to make your day harder, but because you end up with a mutual better product, possibly also with more efficiency, definitely with less remakes. And so it's a win-win. But yeah, enforcing is a big word in this industry.
And can you enforce? I'm just like, has any lab done that successfully, like from your experience? Or is that because I think I'm thinking of the clinic and the lab relationship? Do you have that relationship to convince the dentist to use the protocol or not? Does it come to a one-to-one relationship between a lab technician and a clinic? Or is
Yeah,
it? Yeah.
it's a really interesting question, and because your audience, of course, is a lot of lab owners, I would suggest that they ought to search for the client that fits them. So you can't cater for every customer. You need to find clients that work in the same way as you do. I sometimes feel that dentists have a signature in their work and labs have a signature, and those two signatures need to fit each other, and that will deliver the best result. Sometimes not because someone does something wrong, but because someone has a different signature and then it doesn't fit. Round peg, for example, does fit into a square space. However, it rattles, and what you want to be looking for is you want a round peg in a round hole and a square with a square. And if you are a lab that does a particular product really well, and you have clients that understand what you do, you'll have a long-lasting good relationship. However, if they want something else than what you do, regardless of who's right or wrong, because it's not about that at all. It's about the fit of working protocols. You end up with the best result. So yeah, although forcing protocols is entirely the wrong wording, effectively I think it will find its way itself.
And like most of the labs, and again, I may be generalizing it, but a lot of labs face this pressure of not growing fast enough or not generating enough sales, which could be common to any other business. And then you have resource constraints and you have cash flow constraints from not getting paid on time. Enforcing, or let's say not enforcing protocols again, but putting that line in the sand that guys, this is for the benefit of the outcome. It's a catch 22 because I think it's the mindset of the founder and it's the risk of losing that client if you
Mm.
do that. Like, I'm just trying to get into the mindset, like if you were talking to a new lab owner who's just starting and is confused about this, like what would be your advice? Because I'm stuck as a founder, oh, I don't want to lose that important customer if I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, look, I sometimes I love to go to these day markets where you buy fish and fruit and things like that. And they will teach you a lot about business, in my opinion. They will show you how things work. One of the very important things they do is cash is king. So it's not about getting endless amounts of customers that don't pay. It's very much about getting the right customer for you that pays on time, and that you have this security and this pleasant working relationship with. We all want big customers, and we all end up at times as lab owners with clients that perhaps don't pay or don't pay on time. And it's not just in lab, but in any industry. It's the death of your industry, it's the death of your shop if you don't get money in. So cash is always king. And then there was some years ago, I thought it was a brilliant story about Stelios and EasyJet. There is an optimum in which they made the most money, and it wasn't when they had the most planes. It's not always the case that more planes deliver more money in your pocket. Sometimes it's not the right choice. What you need to do is you need to have the right volume of planes with the right bums on seat that pay the right price, because that will pay for you the best way. And it's very much the same for us. There's no point in endlessly chasing customers where you deliver products to that have no margin. I think as an industry, we've always had this problem where we competed against each other in many ways. And unfortunately, I every day can find a lab that's cheaper than the previous lab. But that's not necessarily the right outcome of our industry. What we should be focusing on is on the right product for the right price, not necessarily just the price. But I'm afraid it's something that lives in our industry and that we need to be mindful of.
How price sensitive are dentists to the lab prices? Like the reason I'm asking is that obviously the dentists are selling to patients, which we know at a premium. They give a share to the clinic as well as part of their contract. And if you look at the cost side of things, which is direct lab bills that they're paying, it would be 5 to 10% of their revenue. So there's a big margin. So is there this price sensitivity from the economic side of things? Do you feel changing pricing offends the dentist, or they know it's for the betterment of giving them better quality? I'm just trying to
Yeah,
understand how
no,
sensitivity.
it's a great question, and it's very deceiving. When you speak to a dentist, they always seem to be very conscious of price. But the reality for a dentist, the biggest asset they have is chair time. So they need to make money at the chair, and they have, for example, an hourly rate of some sort. So our pricing is indeed 5 or 10% in their grossing, which is relatively small. So if you save them time, you help them a lot. The question of, what's my price compared to your price is not necessarily the best one. The right discussion is, can my workflow be more efficient than your workflow? And how much can I help you as a customer? And I think sometimes the discussion ends up in the wrong decision where dentists compare one product to another and do a price-driven decision. First of all, I tend to say to dentists, you cannot compare these products because every lab is different, every service is different, every turnaround time is different. One full ceramic crown, you can find them for 50 quid on the market. You can find them for 600 quid on the market. Surely they're not quite the same product. There is a huge difference between them. So, and then chair time. How much revenue do you get as a dentist from that one crown? How long did it take you? How many more can you do? The dynamic that we have a little bit between us as lab owners of what's your price, what's my price is not the one that I would suggest is the most constructive.
Yeah, because I think I had this discussion with my wife as well. So her clinic uses UK labs and it uses Chinese labs and Spanish labs because they had been using certain labs. And the cost of Chinese lab would be one fifth of, let's say, a London based lab for sake of argument, right? But then the amount of remakes or miscommunications or delays. And the question is the dentist thing from, oh, I'm spending twice the time with the same patient because I'm choosing a
Mm,
not so great lab or where the communication may not be perfect versus saving that 50 quid, which is only
yeah.
10% of my charge to the patient. So I'm just thinking that dentists aware of that, or do you educate them? It comes back to the relationship you have with the dentist.
Yeah, I think the days that a lab is in one location are slowly disappearing. Local labs will order components from Spain or Italy or other countries. I don't think that the discussion is necessarily about one country is better than another. You'll find amazing labs in the UK. You'll find very poor labs in the UK, and the same applies to any other country. Also, a lot of products are now hybrids. So some metal might be made somewhere else. Some local finish might be done in the UK. So you get this large variance in quality and in location. In my opinion, the important thing is the right price for the right quality product delivered on time. That's what a dentist cares about. They don't necessarily care much about all the other aspects of it. They want to focus on chairside time, less so on, where is it made, how is it made, who made it, even though we'd love to think they take a great interest in that. A dentist just wants a cherry on the cake of their prep and a beautiful crown.
Yeah, yeah. And do you think that, like, do labs manage that relationship one on one with the dentist, or like, is, like, let's say if you have a technician, they manage the relationship with the different dentists in MediMatch, for example, or is it the account manager? Like, how do you manage those one to one? Because if you're not working with a dental group, you're working with independent
Mm,
practices, and each practice dentist may have individual relationship, although all four of them would be procuring, the lab work from you. So you're maintaining four kind of relationships within the same
yes.
practice.
I think to some extent it translates in the price. There's some fantastic boutique labs around where you can speak to the technician directly and discuss your case with. That is a really good way of delivering a joint great product. But unfortunately, it needs to translate in the price because it's a very inefficient way of working. If you look at NHS is a good example where we want a really competitive but really good product. It's impossible then to take a technician that's relatively expensive out of line and start discussing the case with the dentist. Is not attractive to either side. So the dentist needs to instruct well, the technician needs to make that in an efficient way, and then you come up with a good end result that is, correct for the price as well. We are not the most efficient lab around, that's for sure. But we do try and have the technician side and the front office, if you like, the front desk separated so that we don't distract the technicians, and that technicians can focus on making beautiful work and that customer service can focus on delivering good service. But for every lab, I think this is a difficult mix in general.
Yeah, I get it. And I think as you grow, managing the relationships and separating those functions becomes pivotal to every lab. So because we're talking about different labs and labs of different sizes, how can labs create more efficiency? We talked about price. Let's talk about the costs, Hugo, as well. So how can there be more efficiency where they can operate at a unit economics that's, effective for them, because they are constrained with increasing, let's say, hourly wages or other costs that are going
Mm.
up. So when you talk about efficiency, like, what are you thinking of, and how small to medium sized labs can create that within their
Yeah,
organization?
I mean, I'm not sure if you would want to be an overly efficient lab. To some extent, I think you need to choose your category if you want to be at the high end of the market, at the middle end, or if you want to be mass production, or if you want to be a boutique lab. I think efficiency comes by doing the same again and again. Sometimes very inefficient steps, but if you repeat them each time, it will give you visibility of your step, and then you can adjust slowly each individual step. It's a bit like a DJ that's got all these levers in front of them. You must know that if you move this one up, this one will automatically go down. And yes, of course, we'd love to be the most efficient, the most beautiful product, and the cheapest one on the market. Every lab would want that, but you can't necessarily have all the levers on full blast. You need to put one up and one down. You cannot endlessly give your time to a dentist and discuss a case, see the patient, shake hands with the patient, discuss the shape and the shade, and then deliver a crown for 10 quid. That price needs to reflect that. We've, particularly in the UK, I must say, we've been a little bit in trouble by trying to do everything and not get that price right. That's the market, I guess, but we ought to reflect that correctly.
So it's a, what I'm getting at, Hugo, it's more of a dance between efficiency and price. And again, it's a positioning of who you are as a lab.
It's a positioning. I would suggest, particularly to labs, that you need to think about what you want to be as a lab, and then position yourself really well. Some labs are, existing big labs, and they find themselves in a particular position, and they can, of course, make it more efficient and improve what they do step by step. But I sometimes joke a little bit about this, and I've told this many times. If you go to a bakery, you go there because you want to buy bread, and everything about it looks bread. It smells like bread. It looks like bread. Everything is bread. And you don't go into a bakery to get your hair done And this is the same for labs. You need to choose what you are and what you do. The biggest lab around only does one product, which is Invisalign. They only make aligners and they have a fantastic business. So we sometimes want to be everything. We want to cater to high end, low end, mid end. We want to do chromes. We want to do acrylic. We want to do crown and bridge, but you don't need to. You need to choose what suits you and do that really well and take pride in your product, as most labs do, and then just deliver a great product. And then success, in my opinion, will follow, because you deliver a good product for the right price and you make sure that it's on time, and your customer will love you.
And are there certain things, Hugo, that no matter what is my positioning, I should be doing as part of? So, for example, the digital side that we started with, let's say, should I enforce those protocols no matter what is my positioning because I want digital data? Is that something like, are there certain things that are no matter what side of positioning you are going after? Is that those are the
Mm.
must? Like as a lab owner, I'm just trying to understand, what are the 4 or 5 things in my 2026 plan that I need to work on? And is the digital side number one, and fixing the price and positioning myself number one thing? Yeah.
I don't think you need to chase digital. I do think a lot of surgeries are moving digital, so it's wise to have a digital offering because it will help you. I can tell you in our lab, for example, we can see that dentists are converting and digital is the trend. So of course, I would suggest you follow the trend and go digital. And it's not very hard to go digital. You can create an account with most scanners companies and get the scans in. I do think one of the important things to be mindful is that your pricing and payments are correct. This is a big pitfall for most labs, especially as you grow. Our costs are always something we need to pay immediately, whereas the cash only comes later. And this is a big challenge to any lab, any growing business. You need to watch that closely.
And how can they get paid on time? So, and one of the payment side of issues that we have seen is that dental groups and other clinics, they would be asking a lot of questions to the labs, which delays the payments. And usually I think labs would have 60 days, like any business, 60 days payment terms or whatever, the payment terms are. And dentists are usually, they don't have a clue the accountant is paying or the finance manager is
Mm,
paying. And is that a problem, Hugo, that you feel that, again, I'm going back to the point of relationship, my relationship with the dentist. The dentist sends the invoice to the accountant or the lab sends it. They don't have a clue of what that treatment is, and there's a lot of to
yeah.
and fro communication which is missed because no one has a clue and everyone is trying to piece the thing together.
Dentists want to pay, groups pay on time. I'm not suggesting that people don't want to pay. What I'm suggesting is if you have one client that pays you on, let's say, 60 days, you miss that little bit of cash. If you then grow from one client to 10, it means that you have 10 clients that now owe you 60 days, even though they will pay you, and it is nobody's mean about it. By nature, more outstanding. And so this is a pitfall to you as a lab owner, regardless of the will to pay by the dentist. So growth, although great, is of course a danger to your cash flow. That's what I mean. Not necessarily that dentists don't want to pay, because in general, I find that our industry people pay very well, but you need to bridge the gap of time.
Correct, correct. And I think when we are talking to dental groups, so on trying to understand, because a lot of the labs have pointed out that sometimes they don't get paid on time, or there are a lot of times when they are overpaid and they have to pay it back because they were paid twice for the same invoice. When we talk to the finance teams at group level, they mention that there's so many things behind the scenes. They have to tick certain boxes before a payment is being made. The teams at group level are also, they're just 3 or 4 member team trying to pay for 8,000 invoices every month.
Mm.
It's chaotic where it's coming from. And that's why the labs, because you're the last ones to be paid, everything gets delayed in that cycle. Do you see
It's
that
not
happening? Yeah.
not at all. No, it's not my experience. I think there is a twist here, which comes a little bit back to these protocols. If you have clarity on what you submit, how you submit, when you submit, you also have quite a lot of clarity on the output of that. I think this is a misunderstanding for those that position this like this to you. We don't have issues with payment, provided we give the groups, but also independent clients, the right information. I think it relates a lot to having a good system. So again, to do, even if it's inefficient, but do the same thing every time in exactly the same way, it means you have some traceability on your steps and how you've done things. But also, of course, if you submit your invoice in the correct format and your group or client or whoever forgot to pay you, it's very easy because you can say, look, you paid me last month. I submitted in the same format. Everything is there. Please pay. And then you have no issues. And in my experience, groups have no benefit whatsoever in not paying on time. They really do want to pay you. So the question I think is not so much around this negativity, but very much about, can you submit it? Help us. We're in a service industry. Help us deliver the information correctly, and then your payments should follow.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, as I mentioned, they have smaller teams as well. So when we see the group is large, usually it's 3 to 4 people managing the finance side of things. And they're dedicated people working last weeks of every month, just trying to pay. And I think they want to pay.
I
You're
think it's a
right. They
big
want to pay.
task. Yeah.
Yeah.
100% they want to pay. So I've honestly, in my 20 years, I've not come across people that don't want to pay. I have come across people that can't pay because of financial issues, and I've also come across, where you have your disputes, and these things are normal in our industry. But you need to take a sensible approach and discuss what's gone wrong, and also look at both sides, because of course labs make mistakes, but ultimately people pay. I don't see a problem with that.
Great. Now, I think thanks for sharing that, Hugo, your perspective on that. To wrap up, trying to understand how, if you want to look ahead, how things are changing within the UK dental industry when it comes to lab side of things. I know that you mentioned when at the opening of this episode that there are lesser technicians, or there are not many graduating or trying to be enter into the lab workforce. How in general are you seeing more labs setting up, or are you seeing more consolidation of labs happening?
Mm.
Like just on a general view of macro view of how things are shaping up.
No, I think there's consolidation for sure. We take very much a people central approach. So the most valuable thing in the lab are your technicians, are your staff, and I think that's going to stay like that, which is good news for people in the industry, because the positions get better. There's a lot more investment going in, which means that those people will get a higher value to the business, but also they will be helped in doing more of the things they need to do and less of the sort of less interesting parts, if you like, because we can automate that, or other people can do that. So overall, consolidation is a big thing. I still think there will be quite a lot of opportunity for small labs, niche labs, and boutique labs with the backing of larger organizations. So we do the same. We will have small labs across the country that support dentists and that are part of the group and benefit from some of the investment we do, but at the same time also find themselves, running their own business, but with a I'd like to say a big brother in the background that can help them. A great example is the sort of a little bit more low value products like model printing. So for our partner labs, we can print the models and they can focus on customer service and delivering the right product. The post processing of model printing is quite a hassle, and we can do that kind of things. So although there will be consolidation, I think we will still have service labs out there, but indeed more with the backing of larger groups.
Hugo, is there enough investment coming into this sector? Like, are there more eyeballs looking into lab? Because versus the dental groups, there has been a lot of private equity within dental
Mm.
groups. Like when you have used the word investment quite a number of times, so I'm just trying to understand, and that was my discussion with some of the other people as well. That there's a lot of opportunities in the lab sector and a lot of investments, relatively speaking, to before. Is that your view as
Yeah,
well?
yeah, totally. Yeah, absolutely. I think some years ago the value of labs was relatively low, but the value of your lab is increasing. There's no doubt about that. Because of this consolidation, the groups like ours invest in labs, in partner labs. So we take a share in a lab, we put equipment in, we help those smaller labs to become bigger. And that was not possible some years ago, but it's absolutely the case now.
And how do they hear about this? Because I think when we are in startup side of things, it's a normal kind of trajectory to partner with someone, raise money, or join an accelerator or a program. When it comes to labs, they're not aware, or are they aware of that they can partner with bigger labs, or do they see that as a competition, or I'm just trying to
It's
understand
not
where it comes from.
it's not a competition at all. I think there's plenty for everybody to go around. So that's certainly not a problem. I don't think there is a central place where you can find that. You do need to reach out to labs like ours to see if that's worth. It's in general from our perspective, the lab needs a certain size to be investable. When they are too small, it's often not possible to put investment in because it's too depending on the owner. But once you get to a little bit of a size of a lab, it's really interesting because the lab is almost standalone, and it is now possible to invest in that and to give them that backing to become more efficient and maybe slightly bigger even, and focus on that service to the dentist.
Thanks for sharing that, Hugo. Before
Yeah,
we wrap
pleasure.
up and before I let you go, there's a I'll put you on stop on the spot to ask a question. So if you want to leave a question for the next guest, now this is a question I stole from Diary of a CEO podcast. So
Mm,
if you want to leave a question for the next guest, who that we don't know who that is,
yeah, yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
if you just leave one question that I can ask them and I can share that back with you, what that question would be.
Well, you do put me on the spot, but I would probably ask them, how often do you check your phone on holiday and why do you do it?
Good one, Hugo. Definitely, yeah. I think that's a very good question to start with the next episode
So
as well.
thank you.
Hugo, thank you so much for your time. You're very
Thanks so
generous
much.
for accepting this to speak. And I think people look at you from the lab fraternity and from other sectors as well as a real mentor if they follow you and they've met you. Thanks for taking out time. I know your schedule is usually very busy. Thanks for taking out
Thank you.
time. I hope people will find it useful, all the insights that you've shared today.